Hello, it's Sophie Hardwick here. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's National Apprenticeship Week, and we wanted to start the week with a really practical session on how you can look at your business holistically and think, how can I map the needs of my business against apprenticeship needs? So I've invited Laura Brooks along today. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi. No problem at all. It's fantastic to have you. Always a fantastic contribution to the webinars. So we've got Laura's expertise here as well, and we're going to talk through how to look at your business, how to think about what it might need, and then map those needs to apprenticeships. After that, we're going to look at how you might recruit an apprentice if it's a new apprentice that you actually need. So that we're going to look at that whole thing in an hour. And we'd like to invite questions throughout. So if you've got any questions, please fire them over to us, and we'll try and help as we go through, or we'll hold questions to the end if it feels relevant. Okay, so let's start with just giving you some context for today's webinar and why we're here and why we're doing this presentation today. I run something called Apprentice Makers. It's an online facility to support businesses interested in apprenticeships. It's entirely not-for-profit. It's not associated with any training provider over another. It's just completely impartial. It was funded by the National Apprenticeship Service, and now we run as a not-for-profit, and we run various different sessions to support employers in order to support the wider network as well. The kind of things we do are we provide case studies and resources around apprenticeships. We offer a monthly update, and one's coming out later this week. There's an online community where you can go in and you can talk about apprenticeships. We often problem solve, so if you are really struggling to find a training provider that you need, we can help try and unravel that, and we can signpost you to businesses that have done similar things so that you can chat to them as well. And we also offer this a non-apprenticeship training, so we offer a mentor training program for people that want to mentor their apprentices, and we offer champion training for people that want to go out in the workplace and champion apprenticeships. And we have recently developed an apprenticeship readiness course for businesses. So those are the bits where if we can run those sessions, we can support the wider community. So if you're interested in those, do let me know as well after the session. As I said, we've got Laura on the line. And Laura, do you just want to give us a snapshot on Ginger Nut and
yes,
your role and why it's interested in apprenticeships?
Absolutely. Well, Ginger Nut Media was formed in 2011 through 3 directors who were really passionate about developing their staff. They took on 6 apprentices, and over the course of the years they've actually trained over 30 of their staff now through the apprenticeship scheme, and in fact they've won awards for their contribution to apprenticeships. The little picture on the left and the right actually is the National Apprenticeship Awards, which we were really proud to win, along with some of our ex-apprentices there as well. Some of our apprentices have gone on to senior roles within the company, and existing staff too have benefited from the apprenticeship scheme. But actually we launched a sister company called Ginger Nut Training, which is where I come into the story, I suppose. We now provide apprenticeship training for other organisations, and actually demand for our services has grown because of the high quality level of support for the employer, but also the learner that we provide, and everything's funded through the apprenticeship scheme.
Fantastic. And so you are a real success story in terms of apprenticeships and the way in which you've implemented them in your business. And you've even gone on to deliver a training offer as well, haven't you, where you can help local employers with apprenticeships?
Yeah, we offer training for any organisation across the whole of England, mainly focusing on the office-based apprenticeships. So that's your business admin, your management, customer service, contact centre, and IT marketing as well are the other areas that we deliver. Great.
So you've got the position where you can comment as an employer and as a training provider. So
and we've used that insight as an employer of apprentices to really go above and beyond to make sure that actually everything is built around, the needs of other employers. And so today I'm kind of speaking with my training provider hat on, but also my employer hat on, because we've been there, and actually the company couldn't be where it is today, if it wasn't because of our apprentices.
Great. Okay. So before we get going, I'd like to launch a poll just to see where people are with apprenticeships, so that I can understand how we can best answer questions as we go through. So firstly, I wanted to ask whether people currently employ apprentices. If everyone on the line could just take a second to answer this one, that would be really helpful. Okay, I'm going to share those results. So no, not at the moment. Planning too soon. Are there. So we've got some people that are on the verge of doing so. And let's have a look at where people are in terms of employing new staff or existing staff. Okay. It's quite interesting that, because the majority of people, I'm going to share, I don't know whether I stopped it too soon, and the answers might have changed, but actually the majority of people are thinking about apprenticeships for existing staff, which is interesting, and it's something that we talk about as well. So it's interesting, because that's a shift that we've seen recently. People always used to think about new staff, but I think the promotions and activities happening around apprenticeships have switched businesses on to the fact that existing staff can be trained with apprenticeships, and of course the introduction of the levy is helping people think about this, and what can they do with their levy contributions if they're making them to fund training for existing staff. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Let's move on to how you can start thinking about apprenticeships in your business. Laura, can you just talk us through how looking at your company's vision can help you think about apprenticeships?
Absolutely. So it's really important before you even look at the apprenticeship scheme to consider what is your company's purpose, what is its vision, what do you actually want to achieve. And if you're a large employer, that could be looking at your business plan or your workforce plans. If you're a small employer and perhaps you're the CEO or the senior manager there, it's really going back to basics and thinking, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to have the best quality customer service in your region? Do you want to deliver a certain sort of service and be recognised nationally for that? I mean, you will know in your heart, and it's really about finding out where your vision is and what knowledge and skills are needed across the whole of your organisation in order to achieve those aspirations. Once you've identified your vision, you can then move on to looking at what skills and knowledge is needed and looking at the gaps within your current workforce as well as your future workforce. What will you need in 5 or 10 years' time?
Mm-hmm. And so if you're a small employer and you're at a senior level in the business, if you've got your business plan, that's kind of your starting point. That's where you need to look at and think, what are we actually trying to achieve as a business? Because if apprenticeships are approached in a knee-jerk fashion, so it's just that we need someone new, we need someone to come in and help, it can have a detrimental effect in the longer term. The best way is to think about where are we going as a business and how can we match our training strategy to address that. And if you're in a larger organisation and you're leading on apprenticeships in your organisation, it's about going back to that to the mission statement of the organisation and looking at the business objectives and thinking about where you're going to first, and then reviewing the existing skills in the organisation. Okay, so then it's about identifying the gaps, I guess, Laura. Can you talk us through this one and why you might think about your core business, but also the support areas in your business?
Yeah, so when you're looking at the gaps, it's easier to divide it into two. So when we're looking at your existing staff, what gaps are there currently within their skills? And then you can align that to their career objectives as well as their role for and their career aspirations within your company. So is it that perhaps they could do with developing some more management skills, and in which case a management qualification may be applicable. When it comes to new staff, it's about looking at the gaps in terms of where could you do with a little bit of more support. And that could be within the core business functions, but it could also be within the support areas perhaps that you're outsourcing at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, I flicked over.
That's okay. I was just going to refer to
Yeah.
the slide.
And
You can also
go on, Laura.
You can also look at the areas that you could well be outsourcing at the moment, which may include HR functions, finance and marketing. And whilst you're outsourcing them, you could be then developing those talents and nurturing those skills within the company so that in a year's time you won't have to outsource so much of that. And actually within Ginger Nut, we've done exactly that with one of our apprentices who now leads on our finance aspect.
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about that area. So if in a small business in particular, you might in the early stages be outsourcing things like accountancy, where you might also have an office manager that's helping the business as well. And it could be that that individual could grow with the business and develop their skills with the business, and as the business grows, becomes the in-house accountant, because then more than anyone will know the kind of information that they will need to share with their existing accountant. So I think there's areas like that where you might have your future professional senior level people already in the business, but you need to grow them with the business. Okay, and so sorry, I clicked on this too soon before, but one thing that Laura really identifies when you go out to talk to business is about the importance of embracing that learning culture. Can you talk us through this, Laura?
Of course. I'm a firm believer that when you create a culture of learning, it can come from the top down. And it's really about people celebrating the successes of their staff, whether that's the full achievement of their apprenticeship, whether it's developing skills within existing staff and existing workforce. It's really about sharing those successes and celebrating them widely across the organisation. And then using that collective knowledge so that you can actually work better and more effectively as a team, because really the collective knowledge of your workforce is far greater than any individual's knowledge. And it's really about if one person's learning and training at the moment, how can they share that knowledge to the wider benefit of the whole organisation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have worked in organisations in the past where training is seen as a bolt-on, and so it's something that people were sent on a course, and then they came back, and it was really hard to implement the learning from that activity. It was almost kind of an aside. Whereas I think if a business can really embrace a learning culture, as we've talked about here, and people can acknowledge that at all levels they need to learn. It's not just something for junior staff, but for senior levels as well. Then it's going to be a business that's constantly evolving as the business changes.
Yeah, and there's also a lot, about career development and whether someone wants to go further within their career or whether they're quite happy within their role. Everyone can benefit from some training, whether it consolidates their existing skills as well as helps them build new skills too. It's a fantastic way to just keep growing and keeping that growth mindset in place within your organisation.
Yeah. And it's also about identifying the gaps. Here, when we did the poll, people talked about how they wanted to focus on internal staff and the kind of support they can give them. And here we've got something that just identifies the kind of questions that you would ask, whether you're thinking about your internal team or bringing in new people, so new external staff. So we've got the is looking at the SWOT analysis that might go with that. Can you talk about this one, Laura?
Yes, of course. So when it comes to identifying your gaps at a business level and you're looking internally, I'm not sure how familiar people are with SWOT analysis. It's about identifying your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities, so that is the apprenticeship training in this case, and potential areas which would get in the way of you achieving those desired outcomes, those your threats. And that may be funding in some situations, or perhaps people haven't got that mindset of undertaking training. So when you're looking at internal really is referring to what's going on within your organisation. What are the good practices, the expertise and the resources that exist? Is that actually you've got some really strong customer service staff in place at the moment? Is it that your business administration staff are so outstanding that they provide a high level of support to your senior team? And then what are the areas of weaknesses? Whether that's capacity, resource. Many of the weaknesses areas can be turned on their head, if you like, through the training that's provided through the apprenticeship scheme. So when you're looking externally, that's really about looking at the opportunities that exist. Although I would say that actually opportunities can be both internal and external. But predominantly opportunities when we're talking about training are externally, because it's an external resource that's required, and it's a training provider that you're going to be partnering with in order to access that. And then you've got your threats as well.
Great. And then it's looking at team level. So once you've done your SWOT analysis of the internal and external strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and threats, it's then looking at what are the gaps in the team. And these are some questions that you can ask. So what are the functions of the team? What skills are required in order to fulfill your team's function? And are the skills achievable and measurable? And again, with the achievable and measurable, we've used quite a familiar model, which is the SMART objectives, to assess that. So is this something that you use a lot with when you're dealing with employers, Laura?
It is, yes. Whether we do it formally or informally, it's all about working and being more proactive in the training that we provide, rather than being reactive, and helping organisations make that mind shift so that they're not just panicking and thinking, oh goodness, I need an extra pair of hands, let's just take on an apprentice. It's about thinking more strategically and looking at where are the gaps and how can we forecast things and make sure that you're developing a really robust, resilient and highly skilled workforce now, but also ready for the future. And yes, we do a lot of work with organisations now with their workforce leads, looking at skills gap analysis and helping them align the training we deliver to SMART objectives, or the other way around, aligning the training we provide to their SMART objectives.
Yeah. And then it's looking individually at each individual. So what's quite nice about the whole process is starting at the organisation level and then working through team levels and then to the individual themselves. And these are questions to ask. And this can be done in terms of an appraisal or a continuous professional development plan. It could be done in one-to-one mentoring. It depends how a business prefers to do this kind of one-to-one discussion to work out individuals' gaps. And by this point, it should be clear where the gaps are starting to emerge as an organisation, as a team. And so it's beginning to have those conversations where, as we're starting to reveal individuals' needs and interests, whether or not they actually do match with where the business and the team needs to be. These are some questions, but there might be others, and there might be different models that businesses use.
Well, it was just to get back in touch to the same point.
Okay, I'll let people just have a look at those themselves.
Last time we were looking at some investment targeted.
Okay. And if people are really struggling to identify where they might want to develop their skills, and if the organisation is struggling to think what it actually needs, this is a list that Laura shares with businesses to give them some ideas of what they might need. This is a really useful list, Laura.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
It's
I'm glad you found
really
that
helpful for business, I think.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad you feel it was good. It's just sometimes people don't look at the whole qualification, and qualifications. The titles can sometimes be slightly misleading, and they can offer a lot more than what the title hints at. For example, project management, that's actually included in the team leading apprenticeship. So it's sometimes about delving a little bit deeper, looking at development ideas, and then going back to training providers, having a little look online, and finding out which apprenticeship is best for them. But yeah, there's some really good development ideas, and they're just a few. I do have a whole long list of others. So if anyone wants to pick that up with me separately afterwards, I'm more than happy to do that.
Great stuff. Okay, so at this point, as an organisation, you wouldn't have had to look at apprenticeships at all. All you're doing is looking at your own organisation and where you want to be. So at this point, you don't need to have spoken to a training provider or gone online and done some research around apprenticeships, just about what's going on in your business. Sometimes training providers good training providers can help you through this process, however. But I would just make sure as a business that you do lead that you own that. So that you're not led to doing apprenticeships or activities that you don't necessarily want to do. So you definitely need to own that process, but good training providers should be able to offer support around this if needed. So then you start thinking about, well, how does this map against apprenticeships that are out there that I could support my team with? And so something that's really worth bearing in mind is that apprenticeships don't have to start at entry level. The entry level, if it needs to be begun at that level, is a level 2 apprenticeship generally, and it tends to be equivalent to GCSE level. But individuals can come in at any level, so they could come in at an advanced level or indeed a higher level. And anybody that's familiar with apprenticeships at the moment will notice that degree apprenticeships are all the rage. They're quite new, and lots of businesses are starting to consider degree apprenticeships in their business. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. So firstly, sort of thinking about how an apprenticeship, where it might be pitched, what kind of individual might be suited to what level of apprenticeship. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that even if an individual has done quite a high level on one subject area, it might still be necessary for them to start at an entry level if it's a completely different area where there's new skills involved. Okay, so mapping against apprenticeships, when we start to think the types of apprenticeships that are out there, there's two different types of apprenticeships that are in the workplace that are available from the government at the moment. There's frameworks and there's standards. And as an employer, it's not necessary to get too hung up on the difference between the two, but I'll explain them here just so you know a bit about the terminology. So frameworks have been around for a long time, and there's many more frameworks than there are standards at the moment. And I think the latest number was something like 1,500 apprenticeship frameworks that are available to employers across something like 700 different sectors or something like that. Is that the latest figure, Laura?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So
it's
there's
changing
lots
all the
time. So, yeah, they're changing, and many frameworks are starting to be switched off as employers aren't using them as well. And they are gradually being replaced by something called standards. And standards have been developed by trailblazer groups, which are groups of employers that are really familiar with job roles in their sector. So groups of employers have come together, and they've started to develop apprenticeships that really match the jobs that are going on in their business. Standards, as opposed to frameworks, are built around knowledge, skills and behaviour as opposed to qualifications. But they're still quite new. So the idea is that by 2020, all apprenticeships will be based on standards. But at the moment, there's only 152 out there. So they're relatively new. But if you're interested in an apprenticeship of any kind, it's worth looking at both types and considering both types and asking your training provider, is this a framework or a standard, and what's the difference between the two? Are they funded differently? So just being familiar with the terminology can be useful. The kind of main difference that employers might notice is the way that they're assessed. So frameworks are assessed as they go along by an assessor that comes into your business and that's organised by the training provider, whereas standards have a final assessment, which employers also decide how that is delivered, and they have a grade. So they have a final assessment and they actually have a final grade as well, whereas frameworks had a pass or fail. So that's probably the thing that employers will notice most as apprenticeships start to be developed. The reason that the government has introduced standards is to improve the quality of apprenticeships across the board and to ensure that they're employer-led. So what employers will start to notice that many new apprenticeships are coming online. The standards are being developed in new job roles that have never had apprenticeships before, and they're also being developed in to replace existing frameworks where employers feel that needs a revision. Is there anything else you'd like to add on frameworks and standards, Laura?
No, not at this point. I would really say if you're confused by it all, don't be. Just reach out to training providers and they'll be able to guide you through the process, talk about the different options. And as new standards are being developed, the old frameworks are being switched off anyway. And it's just replacing or kind of upgrading, I suppose you can think of it like upgrading the apprenticeships and the way in which they're delivered to something called standards rather than frameworks.
So the government is really promoting standards at the moment because they want employers to use these new employer-led standards. And so we've been doing a few tweets around that to actually promote that, and this is one of the graphics we've used for that. And so it's worth, if you're interested in apprenticeships and you're coming into it new, it's worth taking a look and just seeing how they might work for your business. If you want to look at the detail behind frameworks and standards, the place to go is gov.uk. So I've just flicked onto that there, you can see. And there's a whole page dedicated to all different standards under development, and these are them. And there are different levels of delivery. So they are either still in development by a Trailblazer group, or they're actually published and they're ready to go. So you can look at the one that's interesting to you, and you can find out whether or not it's approved. This one is, look, for instance, it's approved for delivery. And then you can see what's involved in it, the different modules involved in it, and what the assessment plan is for that apprenticeship. There's also framework, so you can look at the framework list and see which frameworks might be applicable to your business. Something to bear in mind there is that training providers can often adapt frameworks and standards in order that they work well within your business. So it's important not to look too literally and think, well, actually, that didn't cover that within the apprenticeship, so that's not right for my business. It might be that good training providers can support that in other ways and suggest other ways to address your particular business needs. Is that right, Laura?
That's completely right. And the great thing about apprenticeships is that they are so adaptable and moldable. There is no one size fits all like it is when you go to college or university. It's all tailored around you and your workforce needs. So what a good training provider will do is select the units and tailor the qualification to make sure you get the most from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a very brief look about at standards and frameworks. Happy to answer more questions afterwards, but aware we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to move on. So just thinking about funding for apprenticeships. So say you think, okay, so I've mapped my needs. We understand that we need apprenticeships in these areas. You've had a look at frameworks of standards, and then you're going to be thinking, well, how will I actually fund that being delivered to the individuals that I've identified? So funding is changing from May of this year. and which I imagine most people will be thinking about that period now. And so that's the bit that I've covered in terms of funding. So if you are paying the levy, which most employers are aware of the levy now and whether or not they'll be paying it, it essentially means if you've got a payroll of over 3 million as a business, you will be required to pay a levy. Then it could be that the levy pot that's developed from that, so you pay that on a monthly basis, and then a levy pot is accessible for your business online through the apprenticeship service. You can then spend that on apprenticeships and assessment. Once you've spent your levy pot, then you are required as a business to contribute 10% to the training and assessment costs. So the government contributes 90% of the training and assessment costs for any framework or standard that you want to deliver. As a non-levy payer, there will be no levy pot because you're not required to pay the levy. The 10% contribution is across the board. So you'll need to contribute 10% no matter what apprenticeship standard or levy, standard or framework that you'd like to bring into your business. Something to bear in mind there is that if you've got less than 50 employees and you're training someone that's aged 16 to 18, the government will contribute 100% of the training and assessment costs, so you won't have to contribute anything. And that will apply across the board from May to all ages of apprenticeships, no matter what age, whether they're 16 or 60. All levels of apprenticeships, whether it's entry level, level 2, or whether it's a degree apprenticeship. All sectors, and something to bear in mind there is that if your business is likely to be training in an apprenticeship that's in science, technology, or in engineering, so a STEM apprenticeship, it's likely that the apprenticeship that you choose, if it's in one of those areas, is going to be highly funded by the government. So it's worth looking at what additional support might be available for those particular sectors. But anyway, all sectors, the funding is there, so you just need to find the apprenticeship that matches your business. And all backgrounds. So previously, with apprenticeships, if someone had done some previous training that meant they'd already got government-funded training from the government, they weren't able to then go and do an apprenticeship. So this is something that might apply to graduates, for instance. So if somebody had done a degree in no matter what subject, the business would struggle to source funding to train them in an apprenticeship, which could be quite frustrating, because if someone had done a degree such as English literature, then it could be that they want to actually train in something completely different, in a completely different subject area like engineering. The government wouldn't fund their apprenticeship. But now, if the skills are being seen as substantially different, then the government will contribute those training costs. It's worth bearing in mind that the funding is up to a funding band for each apprenticeship. So if you, when you actually look at the frameworks and standards on gov.uk, as I showed you before, if you click on to more information about that particular framework or standard, it will tell you the funding band for that particular apprenticeship. And the government will only fund up to that funding band. Now, the likelihood is that the training provider will be delivering that apprenticeship so that it doesn't exceed the funding band. But it's something to bear in mind, and it's something to ask about when you're talking to training providers. Will the cost of the apprenticeship exceed the funding band? Because if it does exceed the funding band, anything over and above that, the business will be required to pay. But generally, the apprenticeship will cost something similar to the funding band, and your business will contribute 10%, and the government will contribute 90%. I have this graphic, and I'm sharing it afterwards as well, so that people can look at this at their own leisure. It just explains the way government will fund apprenticeship training in SMEs from May. So there you can see where the government will pay 90% of the training and assessment costs. You as a business will be required to pay 10%. If you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old, you'll get an additional grant of £1,000. Again, if you're a business that's under 50 staff and you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old, the government will actually contribute 100%. And if your business has, if the apprentice has additional needs around, where they live, whether they live in what's classed as a deprived area, or they've got additional learning needs, then the government provides additional funding to the training provider to support that apprentice.
And just to say, when you're talking about 90% of the costs, that really varies. So the total cost really varies. So they'll cover 90% of the total cost, and the total cost could be anything from £2,000 up to £9,000 or more, depending on the level of the qualification. Obviously, the higher and the more technical the qualification, the more expensive they are. So if we were looking at a £9,000 course, you would only pay £900 as a maximum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So even 10% is a fraction of what
Absolutely.
the training is cost to deliver. And so it's a really affordable option for businesses. Okay. We have the option here to cover more information on the levy, but we're not sure how many people are interested in the levy. And I've kind of made assumptions that people understand what that is. So I'm going to just ask the audience whether or not they would like to learn more about the levy or not. So I've launched a poll here to ask this question, because we can quickly touch on it if people are interested in it. Okay, this is a tricky one here because we've got a 50-50 split. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and compromise by covering it in 2 minutes. Can I do that? I've got 2 slides to cover. Okay, if your business, I'm going to hide the poll, sorry. Okay, here's a bit of information about the levy for those people that are interested in it. Okay, so if your business has a payroll of over 3 million, it's subject to a new levy that's coming in place in April. So I've got an example here of a business that has a payroll of over 4 million. This is how it works, of 4 million, sorry. So this is how it would work for a business that has a payroll of 4 million. They will be required to pay 0.5% of that 4 million as a levy to HMRC. Okay, and so 0.5% of 4 million is £20,000. But every business, every levy payer gets an allowance of £15,000 before they actually have to start paying. So that business will in fact be subject to a levy of £5,000 for that year. The levy is paid on a monthly basis, so it will be £5,000 divided by 12 that they'll have to start paying from April. So this is just an example of a business that has 4 million. So imagine that if you're paying that £5,000, that money doesn't just disappear into nowhere. That money goes into an apprenticeship service that then you can access to spend on apprenticeships training and assessment. You can only spend it on those 2 things. You can't spend it on anything else. So if you remember the business example that we gave, it had a payroll of 4 million. That means that £5,000 is available to spend from the apprenticeship service, and the government will top this up with an additional £500. So what do you need to do as a levy payer? Well, you can start registering on the apprenticeship service now. And then from May, you'll start being able to use your developing levy pot to spend on training and assessment. You have to use it within 24 months, else you'll lose it. So if you're thinking about supporting existing staff this is a good time to start kind of getting to grips of what your levy amount will be and how much will be available to spend on training and assessment. If you use up your levy pots, and so those with in the lower kind of echelons might use up their levy pot quite quickly. Anything that you spend over and above that, any apprenticeships that you want over and above that are funded at the 90% rate. So the government funds 90%, you pay 10%. Okay, so that's levy in a nutshell. This is what you can use it for, as I said, training and assessment. You can't use it for any of these things. So nothing kind of surrounding an apprenticeship. Okay, so that's just a snapshot there. If you've got any more questions around the levy, I'm really happy to answer them afterwards. Okay, and then, so there you are. You've understood what your training needs are. You've identified the kind of apprenticeships that you're interested in and the funding that might be available to cover them. Then once you've started the apprenticeship, what will actually look like in practice. And this is Laura's graph. So Laura, could you just talk us through what it looks like once they get going?
Of course. So sometimes people say, what will it actually be like being an apprentice? Do I need to go to college? Will I have time out? So every training provider will be slightly different, but I can speak from my experience at Ginger Nut and the way we work, and it's very similar to others. So what we provide is monthly visits. So that's one-to-one support with an expert assessor. And they are booked around your operational demands. So if Monday mornings are terribly busy, but Wednesday afternoons are quite quiet, then we'll make sure we schedule those monthly visits for Wednesday afternoons, because that works for you. You will also have review meetings every 8 to 12 weeks, and that's with your line manager and your assessor, and obviously the individual learner. And that's a great opportunity to look at how's the individual progressing within the apprenticeship, within that training, as well as how are they getting on in their role. For larger cohorts, it may be there are options of doing workshops on the theory. An example of that would be if you're doing an apprenticeship in customer service, we could do a workshop on customer retention and the importance of communication. And then you go away and you put that into practice within your workshop. So everybody in the workshop would be from your organisation, and it would all be tailored around your company with real life examples, keeping it really real and really work related. So you then go off and apply that theory to your own role, and throughout the duration of the apprenticeship you will be collating evidence in your e-portfolio, and that also helps you keep track of where you're up to. You can also read feedback from your assessor, and it just helps you keep on track. And then you'll have email and telephone contact in between visits as well.
Great. So that's how it will work in practice as a business. So
yeah.
You can see how the level of support that you get from a good training provider is pretty intense and more than a business could offer themselves, particularly in a small business. The more than the resource that they could support with. So I think it's a really nice way to develop training in your business, because you can get much more support than you would be able to offer normally. Okay, so what would you do if you want to find out more about apprenticeships and how it works in relation to your needs? You need to go to the National Apprenticeship Business Support Team, talk to them. There's a telephone number there. You can also go online and look at Take On an Apprentice and get some initial information there. There's also a new register of training providers coming up. So that's a way in which you can see which training providers can deliver which standards and frameworks. It's important as well to speak to more than one training provider. So don't just speak to the first one that comes along, speak to a few and find out how they can support your business, because that relationship between the training provider and the business is absolutely key to the apprenticeship being a success. There's a attachment to the webinar which is called Questions for Training Providers, and it's some of our ideas of the kind of questions you can ask training providers to see whether or not they're a good fit for your business. Okay, so that's our snapshot of how to identify your apprenticeship needs. We've got 7 top tips for recruitment now. If you're bringing new people into your business, got some ideas about how you might approach that. Okay. So tip 1. Laura, do you want to talk us through these?
Yes, of course. So the first one is work with your training provider to advertise the roles. So by working in partnership with the training provider, you can actually meet a much wider applicant pool and attract more interest. So the training provider will probably offer to advertise the roles. I know we do. We use a range of online platforms, but it's important that you advertise on your end as well. So you may choose to use paid adverts or free adverts. There could be events. There's a whole range of opportunities. But by working in partnership, you can actually generate more interest and fill that role in a more timely manner.
Okay, fantastic.
It's also important to keep in touch with the training provider throughout the duration of the recruitment process so that they know what support you might need, and we can also estimate the sign-up dates as you're shortlisting and interviewing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so tip 2.
So tip 2 is tip 2 is consider paid and free online job boards as well as social media. So there are a range of online job boards that you might want to consider. Some of them are sector specific and some of them are more general. Some of them are locality specific. You may want to work closely with your Job Centre Plus. I know we liaise very closely with ours and with our council. You may want to tweak the platform that you use depending on your target audience. So for young people, social media is a great way of engaging with them. So too is contacting their career advisors at the schools. For more mature applicants, perhaps you want to look at paid adverts in the local newspaper and on job boards such as Indeed.com as well. Sometimes as well, job boards online do free offers where if you sign up to them, they will let you advertise the role for free for a month. So that there are lots of different options, and training providers such as ourselves can offer some recommendations around which platforms you might like to consider.
Yeah, and I think what's important as well is that businesses, particularly small businesses, let their networks know that they're recruiting. And because often the businesses that we speak to have found their new employees through their own contacts. So it's a good idea to really get the word out there. And it's also a good way to promote the business because people look favourably amongst apprentice employers. They like the fact that businesses are taking on apprentices. It's seen as a really positive thing. And so it's a good idea to also promote it as a way to promote the business as well. Okay, tip 3. We've got looking at the potential rather than just the qualifications in potential apprentices.
That's right. Yeah, of course. That's right. So it's about thinking about what sort of role are you recruiting into. If it's a more junior role, you need to be realistic around your expectations on grades, experience, and the performance at the interview as well. It's about looking beyond their qualifications and look at their potential. Look at how you can grow them and mould them and develop those skills and nurture those talents to create the sort of employee that you'll want to keep on at the end. And in many cases, applicants might be straight from school or college, and so they might not necessarily perform as well at an interview as what a more mature applicant would. And the apprenticeship is a great way of helping somebody, regardless of their grades, because it's not just people that aren't academically able and perhaps not able to go to university. You get all different people applying, all different ages, but it's about keeping your mind open to the potentials that individuals have, and looking at them from a sort of potential-based, I suppose, approach to the recruitment and seeing whether or not their values align to those of your organisation in order to really get the most from the vacancy that you're looking to fill with an apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Good.
Okay. And we've got stay in control as our 4th tip.
That's right. So if you are looking to employ an apprentice, we thoroughly believe that you should stay in control throughout the shortlisting and interviewing process, because at the end of the day, it's important that you find the right applicant for you and your team. You're the ones that will be working with them every day, and you're the ones that will hopefully be taking them on at the end of the apprenticeship too. So plan the questions you're going to ask, shortlist yourself and interview yourself, but obviously keep engaged with the training provider, and they can offer extra support as well. But if you hand over all control to the training provider and they shortlist an interview for you, then you don't necessarily know the candidate that you're going to be taking on. And who knows your team better and your company better? Nobody does. You know that. You know your company. You know your needs better than anybody else, because you're living and working and breathing it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that as well that don't feel pressured into taking a candidate if they're not right for your business, because that will come back and ultimately end up being the wrong decision. So if your training provider is suggesting an apprentice that they think you should take on, you still need to make that final decision. You need to make sure that they're right for you, because if you're going to invest that amount of time in them and you're going to have them in the business for a certain amount of time, you want to ideally keep them as a permanent employee. And so you're thinking long term. So don't think we're just desperate, we just need someone right now. Think long term. How is this the right person for my business in 2 or 3 years' time as well?
Yeah, and being persevering throughout the recruitment process it's really is worth it. Sometimes we find with young people they may not even turn up to the interview because they got too nervous. Whatever the reason, sometimes these things can take a little bit longer than anticipated, but it is definitely worth it. It's worthwhile seeing individuals grow in a role and bringing in new talent to the organisation. So perseverance really does pay off.
Great. Number 5.
So
consider holding a group interview or information afternoon. How does this work when you work with employers, Laura?
So sometimes in order to save time and money, you may wish to invite all applicants in one go. It's an opportunity to meet everybody face to face, talk about the role and your company, and then afterwards you could always speak to people one-to-one whilst they're there. It allows you to see a greater number of applicants within a shorter space of time, and then you also have the opportunity to take any questions that the individuals might have regarding the role and your company. And then you can conduct one-to-one interviews either on that same day, asking them to stick around afterwards, or at a later time. You may also want to consider telephone interviews as well, as just to kind of streamline the shortlisting process.
Yeah. I know quite a number of smaller businesses that do smaller assessment days. So I think there's a perception that assessment centres and assessment days are only for large businesses. But if they don't need huge amounts of management to work in small businesses as well. So even if you're bringing in, say, 6 potential candidates and then setting a number of tasks throughout the day, giving them a tour of the building, introducing them to a few people, it will reveal an awful lot about those candidates that you might be able to get beyond what you would get from just a one-to-one interview. So it's definitely worth considering. Okay. Tip 6, we've got consider offering work experience to applicants. I think this is a great one. I think this is a way that, particularly at entry level, can really help employers understand what an individual is like and what their potential is. Do you want to talk us through this one, Laura?
Yeah, so you could offer a week or 2 weeks work placement, or if you wanted something more structured, you may want to offer a traineeship. When it comes to work placements, it could be paid or unpaid, and it's a great way of almost having a try before you buy approach, allowing the individual to understand a bit more about the role and what it's like working with you, as well as you to understand and find out a little bit more about what it will be like working with them. And it adds that extra layer, I suppose, of reassurance that you're making the right decision and finding the right applicant for you, It might be that you offer work placements to a few that you've shortlisted to, and then you choose the successful one or two, depending how many roles you're looking to fill.
Yeah. And traineeships are a really good opportunity here. So I don't know whether businesses that are on the line know about traineeships, but it's not an apprenticeship. It's kind of can work as like a pre-apprenticeship program where you can take on an individual for anywhere between 6 weeks and 6 months, and it works like a work experience. Right? You don't need to pay them, although many employers will cover their travel expenses, and there can be paid training for that individual whilst they're in your business. So say, for instance, you normally offer a work experience program over the summer holidays. That's one that would fit really well with traineeship. You could turn it into a traineeship. So you offer it in the same way as you've been doing previously, but you work with the training provider to offer training alongside it. And that's a really nice way for you to start to understand whether or not that individual might be well suited to an apprenticeship. So there's no obligation to employ them at the end of a traineeship. It's seen very much as just a short-term work placement, but it's a great way for your business to understand whether or not they might be a good candidate for an apprenticeship after the traineeships ended. Do you get involved in traineeships at all as an organisation?
We don't really get involved in traineeships. They're almost like the stepping stone for individuals to step into an apprenticeship because we specialise in apprenticeship training. We don't really get so involved in traineeships. It may be that somebody comes to us having completed a traineeship, but we don't actually offer traineeships at the moment.
I think they're not used that much, but actually they're a really good opportunity for businesses to sort of try before you buy kind of approach to apprenticeship. So I think they're worth exploring if it's something that a business is interested in or currently does. If they do work experience, how about turning it into a traineeship and also trying out a training provider as well? If it's a training provider that also does apprenticeships, it's about understanding how that relationship's going to work and doing a short-term program with a view to moving into apprenticeships later.
I mean, we've been very involved in the work placement and work experience, area, and we just haven't offered formal traineeships. But I can, I can definitely speak from Ginger Nut Media and Ginger Nut Training to say that work placements have been very successful in the past in helping us identify the right candidate for the role, as well as engaging with the local community too.
Yeah, it's a good way to find out which organisations are interested in engaging with potential candidates, I guess, and starting to work with schools and things like that. Yeah. Okay. So that was tip 6. So tip 7, consider offering above the apprenticeship minimum wage and other incentives. So it's not just about the money, other areas that you can support with as well. So the company that's actually featured in this picture is Great Annual Savings. They were shortlisted for SME Newcomer of the Year at the National Apprenticeship Awards. They won their regional heat for that, and they offer above the national minimum wage for an apprentice. So it's for them, they see it as being an important way to say that this is a significant role within their business. It's one they take seriously. So just in case you don't know, the minimum wage for an apprentice is £3.40 an hour. It's going up to £3.50 an hour from April. And that's for a 16 to 18-year-old or an over 19-year-old that's in their first year of their apprenticeship. After that point, it has to be the national minimum wage for whatever age the apprentice is at. So one thing that businesses do sometimes do in order to attract the right candidate is offer more than the minimum wage. Do you notice that, Laura, that people tend to?
Yes, absolutely. I think as well it depends on the sort of level of apprenticeship that you're looking to recruit into. Sometimes as well it depends on the role. If you're looking to fill it with a more experienced individual and you're looking to recruit somebody that isn't necessarily a school or college leaver, then offering above the national apprenticeship minimum wage or an incentive scheme where perhaps their wage is increased as they take on new responsibilities is a great way of attracting different applicants to your vacancy.
Yeah. And also, as well as the financial side, there's offering additional support to an apprentice, saying that you've got a mentoring scheme, or that you have external training days, things that might attract potential candidates to your business, and showing that you value apprentices as well, I think, can mean people choose that employer above another one.
And the opportunity as well to step on to further training at the end. So perhaps they're doing a level 3 and afterwards they can do a level 4, or perhaps you're going to progress them all the way up to degree level but funded through the apprenticeship scheme. Yeah, people were really attracted by that. Obviously, for some people it was a choice between doing an apprenticeship and going to university, and they may not have chosen university because of the cost implications. So, even just getting an apprenticeship with yourselves is a great incentive in itself, but what extra added bonuses can you provide for that individual?
Yeah. Okay, so that's our 7 tips. That's a summary of those. Let's let people have a quick look at. I can't believe it, but we've actually managed to finish roughly on time, I think, Laura, which is, we haven't done for the last 2, but yeah, great. And so if anybody wants to ask any further questions of myself and Laura, we'd really like to invite them to do that afterwards, because we've run out of time now for our webinar today. We hope you found it useful. Please download the handouts that come with the webinar, and look at the resources on Apprentice Makers as well, see if there's anything else that you can use there to develop your apprenticeship program. Any more questions, as I said, email myself, and I'm happy to forward any emails on to Laura if they're of interest. These are our 3 upcoming webinars in the next few weeks. So the business I just talked about there, Great Annual Savings, they are sharing their apprenticeship story with us on Friday. So if you'd like to tune into that, that's at 11 o'clock on Friday. We've got Ask the Degree Apprentices next week, where we've got a team of degree apprentices who are going to be talking about how that works for them. And then in a few weeks' time, we are talking about apprenticeship training agencies. What are they, and how can they support your business? They are essentially a go-between between a business and a training provider, and on some occasions they are the training provider themselves, and they can employ an apprentice so that the business doesn't have to at that particular stage. So if you're interested in that, there's more about that in a few weeks' time. And that's it. I don't think we've got time for questions, unfortunately. Those are my contact details. Please feel free to drop me a line. Thank you, Laura, for all of your support today. A lot of the graphics in there were yours that I've borrowed from this presentation, and a lot of information is yours. And so I'm really grateful for that. If anybody wants to talk to Ginger Nut Training about training, we'd encourage them to do so, because they are incredibly supportive when it comes to SMEs and businesses in general around apprenticeships. So a good training provider to talk to. If you have any further questions, as I said, ask me afterwards. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.